We're going to talk through the results from the weekend. That to load. And I'm joined by Lola. Here she is. Lola, I'm trying to make room for you here, but I can't hear you. Lola, I can't hear you. Oh, there you are. Hello, Lola.
I'm here. Hi, everyone. We are so sorry for the late running of the stream and for any technical issues. Well, I'm mainly sorry for the technical issues that Scarlet experienced and for going through about 4 different tolls to make it here. But we are here. We made it. Welcome to The Goal Difference, everyone. Scarlet has started another show with the wrong episode artwork. But there we go. That's what I'm here for. To sweep in and clean up the mess. Look, we have a packed show. Hi, Stephen. Thank you for joining. Thank you for being such a loyal follower of the show. We have a packed agenda tonight after the first weekend of Premier League football. Safe to say, I think Scarlet is probably feeling slightly happier than I am right now. And I'm sure lots of you who've joined us over from Anfield Index will have some big questions to ask of the Liverpool recruitment team. But look, first and foremost, we're going to talk through the results and then we will move on, of course, to the final week of the transfer window. But first up, Scarlett, just tell me, what's your overarching feeling? Are there any trends that you can pull out from the Premier League weekend?
So yeah, I mean, look, Lola, you've joined me obviously a little late with your Anfield Index background. I don't know how to get one of those, but what I was just discussing here was the fact that what I've extrapolated from the weekend was Arsenal's apparent ease. I mean, as I said to these guys, lads, it's Coventry, but I think actually that ties into my biggest takeaway from the Premier League weekend, and that is that so many teams are under so much construction. I remember this descriptor being used to talk about an Arsenal-Liverpool game at Anfield in about 2014 when Arsenal were wearing their purple kit and Liverpool were newly under the management of Brendan Rodgers. And I think it just feels quite overwhelmingly like a lot of teams, a lot of big players in this league haven't taken their final shape yet. What do you make of that assessment?
I think you're absolutely spot on. I think it's a phony war. Hi, Jordan. Hi, Horace. Jordan, got to keep the branding on point for this channel. So this is the EPL channel. If you want to watch with the red background, come over to Anfield Index anytime. You'll see me there many times. But look, I agree with you, Scarlett. It is a phony war at this stage. Lots and lots of teams don't seem like they've taken shape, don't seem settled in their identities, in what it is that they're trying to do and how it is that they're trying to play, mainly because of personnel. And to some extent, I'm willing to be understanding about that. It has been a World Cup summer, and that does obviously set back transfer plans. It's been a weird transfer market. There've been there have been sagas, but just like there always are. But I suppose if I'm just to wear my Liverpool hat for a moment, I actually don't think it has to be a phony war. Just because everybody else hasn't sorted their shit out doesn't mean that you have to delay your own decisions. But I think you really saw that this weekend. The most settled teams are the teams that have done the best so far, apart from maybe with the exception of Ipswich, who've signed lots of new players. But it can go the other way, as you saw with Sunderland last season. So yeah, I think you're absolutely spot on to observe that there has been a lot of churn. And that across
Lola, I interrupt this broadcast to tell you that Fulham have equalised against Chelsea, which is good news, I think, for everyone in this chat, guys. Josh King has got a 23rd minute equaliser. I'm just looking at BBC Sport to see if I can find a description of that goal. All Red Runner says King has just smacked in an absolute belter. Okay, thank you, interestingly, I'm seeing that it was a Robert Sanchez mistake, which makes it even better, guys. Yes, hit the like button and subscribe. It greatly helps the channel. Thank you. You'll never walk alone, William Farrell. Thank you. Thank you, William. But yeah, I looked across the league, but I think it was most stark for Aston Villa and Liverpool, the extent to which both teams look weaker on paper than they were last season. And I think there's always
you can always make arguments, hypothetical arguments based on preseason performances and based on young players and returning players from injury. But I think Liverpool and Aston Villa were both testament to the kind of hypothesis that you need Premier League experience and you need partnerships and you need a band of brothers that know each other and want to fight for each other, because otherwise when the chips get down, you look around you and you don't recognize the guy to your left and the guy to your right is a youth team player. And that's why you saw games getting out of hand. Now, in Liverpool's case, you know, one of the big positives that I can take from that game is that we didn't lose and we were able to come back. But from Aston Villa's perspective, I think one of the main reasons why they weren't able to come back is because they're just, you know, totally unsettled and dejected. And one bad thing has to happen to confirm that bias of, oh, we're not actually very good.
Well, Lola, interestingly, if we look at the lineups for this Fulham and Chelsea game, which is happening right now, you know, to some extent, Fulham are fairly settled, apart from the fact that now they have a new manager. And of course, you know, they've lost Jimenez and they've lost other key players, and they're replaced by Palacios and Garcia, who've gone straight into the starting lineup. If we look at Chelsea, they've actually tried to integrate a lot of their new players. So they've got Lacroix in at centre-back, and they've also got Morgan Rogers starting up front as well. And oddly, you know, well, it depends how odd you think it is, there is no place for Enzo Fernandez. So I think Chelsea are a team who have a lot of question marks over them as well. And we'll see how this goes. I mean, it is a London derby to start with. I'm glad that Fulham have got something to say for themselves in this game, because otherwise it was going to be a slightly difficult live stream to be reporting on Chelsea winning so early in the season. But when you speak to the construction, I think it's quite interesting, because obviously continuity is important if you're good. But the flip side of that continuity is that Tottenham were absolutely rubbish in a way that we've seen from them so many times. And I think that's part of what made it so funny over the weekend, the deja vu of watching Man United and Tottenham lose. And of course, United were mauled by the Tigers, which in and of itself would have been enough to make me happy for a while. I was going to do that, Lola. I didn't. I'm not sure if our watchers would have enjoyed that. But listen, I want to come to the comments for a moment before we move on. Lola, I know we've got various reactions to talk about and some transfer news. Horace Brittle says Gakpo could be the best winger in the Premier League, a different club in a different system. I don't know if you want to speak to that. My impression of Gakpo is that he's a very clever player. I think he's a decent player. I know that Liverpool fans feel very frustrated by him, the cut inside and shoot. But, you know, he scored yesterday. I think something I associate with him is having a good eye for goal. He's tall. He's good in the air. I think in a way, like, and this is probably a really uncharitable comparison, he reminds me a bit of Brennan Johnson, but like a really good Brennan Johnson, you know, someone who just knows how to arrive in the important moment. Lola, I don't know if you want to speak to that a little bit.
Yeah, I mean, we're jumping all over the place in terms of agenda. So let's just try and stay on one thing at a time here. But yeah, why don't we just go for it on the transfer front now? So Gakpo, as many of you will know, has been heavily linked to Tottenham all the way through the window. That deal has at points looked as good as done. And, you know, we've all heard that Tottenham, even with the signings of Savinho and likely Omar Marmoush, will still go into the market for another winger. Liverpool, of course, in the market for more wingers themselves. So it's a weird situation to begin with. And then just today, you get news breaking, and it kind of started off small and then escalated to Fabrizio Romano, that Manchester City are interested as well. And as a Liverpool fan, I have to say, off the back of a disappointing result, it has absolutely burned my head out. And I know that doesn't really answer your question about Gakpo, the player, but I'm coming around to it. The point is, Gakpo is a capable Premier League player, as is being proven by the fact that he's being linked to Premier League sides that have a need for goals, and goals in wide areas specifically. It may be the case that he is one of those unfortunate players that is a bit of a jack of all trades and master of none. He certainly likes to play in that left channel and cut inside on his right. He has played, as Neil Caldwell says, he's played off the front. He played in midfield as the most advanced midfielder, and none of those have really worked. So it is true to say that Gakpo has never really, apart from when he's played on the left, nailed down one position. But the fact is,
he's wanted by clubs across the league because of that Premier League experience. And I find the idea that Liverpool, with so much transfer business to do, would take away from the team, take away from the current team, to whom Gakpo is crucial and was the best attacker and man of the match against Newcastle. And that is a little bit of an indictment of Liverpool's level, by the way, that was the case. But anyway, it's, you know, it's taking away with one hand. It's the opposite of that give with one hand, take with the other. It's taking away from one hand and giving to a rival. It's absolutely astonishing if Liverpool allow that deal to happen. Cody Gakpo leaving the club should be something that happens right at the end of the window if Liverpool have all the targets that they want, and that would mean 3 attacking signings. But until
Lola,
then,
can I just jump in?
he would be.
I think your you know, Liverpool fans seem to feel really strongly about Gakpo, and I feel you run like a runaway train. And I think interestingly on Gakpo, you know, we can't really speak to what's going on behind the scenes with these transfers as much as we wish we knew. I think the conversations are being had all the time, and Liverpool will have been talking about Barcola months, years ago even, and Minter the same. It's possible that they have encouragement that these deals might happen, and that's why they're moving on the Gakpo thing, and we're seeing that reported now. I think really what the Gakpo thing tells me is that Liverpool are quite close to signing Bradley Barcola. I don't know what you think about that.
Yeah, I guess. But then these noises about advanced talks and noises about Tottenham have been going on for weeks with no movement. But I think it's more just it speaks to the backwards squad planning at Liverpool that has taken place now over the course of a few windows. That you're in a situation where, look, it was out of Liverpool's control what happened to Alexander Isak last season and what happened to Hugo Ekitike. So there's no blame attached to that. But Mohamed Salah, they chose to let go and knew about letting go of him, whatever it was now. You know, coming up for 6 months ago, we knew Mohamed Salah was leaving the club, and there is no right winger in the squad. So it's the idea that you're reliant on a player who you don't really like and would be happy to move on, but don't have better options and haven't brought in the other players. It's just baffling and frustrating.
I guess the flip side of that, Lola, though, obviously, is that you've got a new manager in and you are building. And I agree when there's comments in here saying all red runners saying the squad is paper thin. And I think something that surprised me and something that I noticed you said on X the other day was that the team has got weaker over the summer. I mean, inevitably it's going to get weaker if you lose Mo Salah, right? And that's going to make a massive difference to your ability to attack. But I think potentially, do you need to like put these things in place because you know that this is a construction, this is a building season under Iraola, and if he is not convinced and Liverpool are not convinced that Gakpo can offer something to them, wouldn't it be very Man City, very thrifty of Liverpool to move him on for a big fee?
I don't agree with that because Liverpool locked Cody Gakpo into a 5-year deal on good wages. He's on upwards of 200 grand a week around about this time last year. And people lost their heads because they thought that was kind of confirmation that he was like a first name on the team sheet type of option. But actually it wasn't. That was about preserving his transfer value, because if everything had gone to plan last season, potentially Ekitike would have taken some minutes on the left. You would have had Rio coming in behind on the left, Isak cementing himself down the middle. Maybe you have Florian Wirtz doing bits at number 9, and Mohamed Salah would still have been Mohamed Salah with a year left on his contract. So you would start to think, okay, maybe Rio has taken Cody Gakpo's place in the squad. So on the one hand, they were setting things up to sell Gakpo for a big fee. But here's the thing. Liverpool actually did do a smart thing to tie Gakpo down to a 5-year contract last summer. So he has 4 years left on his deal now. If Liverpool hold on to Cody Gakpo to benefit them in the short term, even if they don't feel they can build the long-term attack around him, Liverpool will be in a stronger position than if they let go of him. Yes, Ibrahim Mbaye and Rio Ngamoa may go on to be absolute superstar world-class talents, but they aren't yet. So my point is, we don't have to get rid of him now. Liverpool can hold on to him until January and still extract a good fee because of that contract that they've tied him down to. So I don't see the logic in letting a player walk out of the club that has 18 Premier League goals in a title-winning season, right? I do not see the logic of that when you're bringing in Bradley Barcola,
for argument's sake, who will not be fit to kick a ball properly until after the first international break. Yankuba Minta, who was injured for 3 months. And then one more, let's say it's Ibrahim Mbaye, complete wildcard young player. It's just, and everything, to go back to the very first point that you made about the show, about churn and continuity and teams that have made lots of changes and are looking around and look different and look weaker, that getting rid of Gakpo would be kind of an ultimate self-inflicted wound, because he is one of the only points of continuity that Liverpool have and one of the only Premier League proven attackers that Liverpool have.
Yeah, and I take that point. I think the point I was making, and we'll end this discussion here and move on into a little more detail about Liverpool's performance against Newcastle, is I guess we don't know the moving parts in the background. And your argument is, regardless of moving parts, Liverpool should keep the continuity of Gakpo. And I guess when everything else is ripped up, maybe it's an opportunity, you know. My feeling about Liverpool, looking at that lineup against Newcastle, and Newcastle too, was, God, I mean, who are some of these players? I don't know who Munoz is. Who's Kumas? I don't know who these players are. Like, and there is a bit of an early season about it. And I do think, you know, normally title-winning teams don't start like this, but there's been many a season where Arsenal have finished in the top 4 and had what I would consider to be successful seasons, having started way off track, especially in the Wenger era. You know, I think about the summer I think it was the summer of 2011. Arteta came in, Mertesacker, Benayoun, Park Chu-young, all in this crazy trolley, Andre Santos in a crazy trolley dash at the end of the summer after we'd got smacked 8-2 by United. And I guess I'm struck by, in this era of needing to move so quickly in the Premier League, how many teams have got to this point of the summer in this shape. Because, you know, I look at the Man City roster, I look at the team that started against Bournemouth, and I just think, Rico Lewis, really? I mean, he actually was all right, but I feel like the decision has been made about whether he's good enough to start for City. And the Newcastle team, I mean, they did well against Liverpool, but it was bizarre. And Liverpool too,
D-Select says Morgan Rogers has scored for Chelsea, so that's 2-1 to Chelsea.
Oh, that's really disappointing.
Yeah.
Well,
look, can I just jump in to say, you ask how it happened. And you ask, Lewis Kumas is just a promising youngster that's been around the squad for a while, but he's been on championship loans and done well over the pre-season. So I'm not, you know, I like to have players coming through from the academy. If you had lots of other options, he's someone that you'd be very happy to have around. But you ask how we've got here, and how we've got here is what Jamie Carragher is talking about here on Monday Night Football, which could arguably be Liverpool's worst transfer window. Now, it's harsh, and you know that headline has been taken out to get clicks, and I'm sure it will. But if we just dive into it a little deeper, Alexander Isak, the jury is still massively out on him because of the injury. Florian Wirtz is starting to burn heads out, and there are real questions starting to be asked about whether he's actually suited for Premier League football. Because to me, the Florian Wirtz that I've seen, he just doesn't seem to have that dog in him. And when things become physically difficult, he fades out of games. Hugo Ekitike sidelined through a massively long-term injury. Kerkez has looked lost in a Liverpool shirt, weighed down by the shirt. Frimpong, I still don't understand what type of a player he's supposed to be. He has one extreme attribute, and that's pace. Mamardashvili doesn't look like a Liverpool goalkeeper. He can't kick the ball. And Paul Leone got injured with an ACL injury 71 minutes into his Liverpool debut. So yeah, you can look through every single one of those signings and say massive, massive, massive question marks against them. And as you know, Scarlet, any mistakes in the Premier League, any backward steps, and you will be punished. And this is simply Liverpool getting their comeuppance for some bad decisions, but also some terrible luck for Liverpool.
Yeah, and I think I want to ask you about these players. Obviously, you mentioned terrible luck, and Isak's injury last season was part of that. But I think something that we have to draw attention to, and I have to ask you about, and it's not necessarily something I agree with the criticism, but it was something we discussed last season. You mentioned Florian Wirtz and Isak. Look, it's one game into the new season. They may well have really productive seasons for Liverpool. But at what point do you start worrying about those players? And do you have different feelings about both of them?
Well, look, as Walter White here says, and thank you for the comment, and thank you everyone in the chat for showing up.
Walter White says $250 million on our front two, it's not good enough. And I agree with that. Look, Isak and Wirtz have had very little time together on the pitch in their Liverpool careers. I think last season, Isak, Wirtz, and Ekitike were on the pitch for 80 minutes total across the entire campaign. So it's really, really hard to judge players. Bless you. Oh dear. Are you okay? Have you dropped? Scarlet's disappeared from such an intense sneeze. I don't know.
Carry on, everybody.
No, I think Walter White's comment is pertinent. For that kind of money, you know, especially Alexander Isak, actually, who has experience playing in the Premier League, it is not good enough. And I think yesterday, a lot of Liverpool fans, myself included, hoped that he would go to St James's Park and rise to the challenge. They were kicking him left, right, and centre. But instead of looking angry, he just looked hurt. And the same goes for Florian Wirtz. I think, you know, I have a lot of sympathy for the fact that Wirtz needs runners to look like a good player, to play football the way he wants to play. And he hasn't had that really in his Liverpool career, players that want to run in behind. But, you know, why did you sign him? Why did Liverpool sign a number 10? Andoni Iraola doesn't play with a number 10. Arne Slot didn't play with a number 10. Jurgen Klopp didn't play with a number 10. Liverpool haven't played with a number 10 since Felipe Coutinho left the club. So it just seems like a really baffling decision to spend that much money on him. D-Select says Iraola hooked him at minute 60, said a lot. So, I couldn't agree more with you, D-Select.
So in terms of the Liverpool setup, because I know that we've been talking about Gakpo and potentially leaving and players coming in, is there a world in which, I know it's been tried a few times, it was tried a few times last season, is there a world in which Florian Wirtz becomes a member of that front line, either plays off the front or in like a false nine position, or comes off the left-hand side into that space in the inside left channel? Is that potentially something that you think maybe that's the thinking behind all of this?
No, I think Iraola plays 4-4-2 as near as damn it. And effectively what you saw between Wirtz and Isak at Newcastle is a front two with Wirtz playing off the striker. And I think if that ends up not being a position where he thrives, there isn't really anywhere else you can put him, because you don't want him in that wide left position where Iraola needs a pacey player who can get in behind, and you don't want him on the right. You don't want him in the double pivot. So that's the only position really that he has where we can, you know, where you can platform him to make an impact. No, I'm really worried. I'm really worried about Florian Wirtz, and it was always going to be difficult at St James's Park. There's a lot of context between the two teams, a lot of water under the bridge. They were going to be angry about Isak. And, you know, we poached Victor Munoz from them. World Cup winner, by the way, in Spain's World Cup squad, Scarlet. So he's not a complete unknown, Victor Munoz.
No, I mean, look, he won you that penalty. He totally passed me by. Can you tell me about him as a player?
He's a very explosive winger that can play on both sides, extremely pacey, very raw, great shot power, kind of like Craig Bellamy, but Spanish.
Okay, good. Interesting. Look, I want to ask a few more questions before we move on. I think we will talk Arsenal after a little bit of a transfer interlude. What do you think, Lola?
I think that sounds good to me, Scarlet.
Great. So my question to you is, and we've had versions of this conversation before, but Liverpool, like it or not, are in a rebuild phase. They are in a huge transitional moment where this totemic figure at the club in Mo Salah has departed. They are without their most recent manager, but really it's about, you know, the end of Klopp football at Anfield. And they are without some of the key figures who brought success during that time. Obviously, Virgil van Dijk is still there, but, you know, for how many years, we don't know. Is the question about the recruitment really, you know, there is an argument about Tottenham's recruitment. I don't know if you've seen this going around. They've gone into TK Maxx and paid full price for everything. I don't think Liverpool paid anywhere near full price for Mane, for Salah, for Firmino, even for Luis Diaz, who I think, you know, we've definitely talked at times about him departing too soon. Have you just got players who, you know, okay, Wirtz as yet has not lived up to his price tag. However, we're seeing 100 million slapped around for anyone at the moment. So how much is 100 million really? And Isak, we know how good he can be, but he hasn't really had the chance. He's not exactly in a part of his career where missing football is not a big deal. It is a big deal for him, especially at his age. So is there just a kind of feeling that like you've not won the transfer jackpot? You've not got any more than you could have hoped for out of these players. In fact, maybe you've got a little less.
Yeah, I think that's a really apt description. I think Liverpool made a series of gambles last summer, and every single one of them backfired. You can run through it. Liverpool gambled on signing Giovanni Leone, incredibly highly rated, and he gets injured, and not pursuing the Mark Gahey thing and paying the extra money to bring him early. So that deal falls through. And then you think, okay, well, we're going to have to rely on Leone, and then Leone gets an ACL injury 71 minutes into his debut. I could go on. Alexander Isak, your £125 million striker, just starts to look like a £125 million striker and gets injured, gets his leg broken in the act of scoring. Hugo Ekitike, who had to carry the burden of being the only natural striker at the club for most of the season, looks completely gassed out and then ruptures his Achilles, which is the worst injury in football. Jeremy Frimpong, who'd never had a history of injury previously in his career, has consecutive hamstring injuries all through the campaign. I could go on and on and on and on, but everything Liverpool did last season backfired. So how we view the transfer window ultimately I think it's very difficult to judge it based on last season and based on everything that happened. But as I've said, part of the phony war at this stage in the season is how much emotional attachment you have as a football club and as a fan and as a player to what happened last season. We are still coloured by our experiences. You saw a Liverpool side racket off 5 wins in a row at the start of last season, pulling remarkable victories off week after week. And that was about inherited mentality and confidence from the season before. So it's really, really difficult because right now, everything that happens just feels like confirmation bias from last season with that group of signings and with that transfer window. And I can see why Jamie Carragher is pulling up that graphic. I think just to round off what my real issue is that I don't think Liverpool's problems, you talk about transition, I don't think Liverpool's problems are so profound that they're not fixable. I think Liverpool's problems are extremely obvious. I think Liverpool's problems at St James's Park were extremely obvious. I'm banging my head against a wall because I don't understand why some of these problems haven't been addressed in the transfer market and why, with 8 days to go, Liverpool look like they need to make 3 signings.
Okay, well, I mean, it's not a positive vibe coming out of the Liverpool half of this stream, and we will move on to happier matters, everybody, I promise. But before we do, I just want to have a quick look at some of your comments. Thank you, everyone who's been commenting. Thank you, everyone, for joining and for watching. We really appreciate it. Walter White, maybe Verts wants to go back to Alonso. Would you take 100 million euros now? You would take that. Would we take that? Lola's nodding. I think so. I mean, 100 million euros, that's still less than what you bought him for, right?
I would take, I mean, maybe I wouldn't take 100 million euros. I would take his price back, or 100 million pounds, because Liverpool probably haven't paid all of the add-ons, because I worry that Liverpool could end up bending the whole of the rest of the team out of shape in order to accommodate this unicorn footballer who potentially doesn't look like a player that will thrive in English football. Now, I desperately want Florian Wirtz to make me eat my words. And at times last season, he was majestic. He's a beautiful footballer to watch play the game. But the Premier League is a funny old league. And I think, people have spoken about the space and time he got on the ball in Germany in the comments. Like, it's just, maybe it's just the wrong type of player. Right now, I'd be knocking on the door of Diego Simeone and saying, would you swap Wirtz for Alvarez?
Yeah. Well, we're going to come on to Julian Alvarez. I just want to mention a few other people's comments. Horace Brittle, Liverpool are not big spenders, they're big scouters. I presume you're speaking to Liverpool's non-proactiveness in the market, which I'm sure Lola will agree is probably a fair point. D Select says he just looks like he struggles with the lack of time on the ball and lack of space he got in Germany. Yeah, I mean, to be honest, from the outside, that's what I feel. I have a very vivid memory of watching Liverpool at Selhurst Park last season. I was in the home end, and I watched Florian Wirtz. I think he started out on the left that game, Lola, is that right?
Yeah.
Yeah, so he was right in front of me. And I honestly, like, the endeavour he showed and the positivity was worrying to me, because I just thought it's going to happen for him. You know, he's so close. In fact, I think he may have even had a big chance in that game, or definitely Isak had a really big chance in that game.
It's missed a big chance.
Yeah, and maybe that is a bit of a sliding doors moment, and sometimes it happens. Sometimes it just doesn't go right from the start and you can't really rescue it. I don't know if that necessarily speaks to Florian Wirtz's quality as a footballer, but I think what struck me was not a kind of hesitancy. I thought he looked really positive, and ultimately maybe he would have had a deciding outcome on that game, but it's really hard when you start losing your confidence. And I think what he definitely doesn't demonstrate is doesn't look like he's a player who's particularly confident. So just a couple more comments before we move on. Walter White, OMG, please don't let Arsenal get Alvarez. Double A1 says, I said
Scarlet appears to have frozen. Can everybody else still hear and see me?
something strange happened with our visuals there for a moment, but let's use that as a segue, because I want to come back to Walter White's comment about Alvarez. So Walter White, OMG, please don't let Arsenal get Alvarez. Lola, should we talk about the Julian Alvarez saga that seems to have become another saga that Arsenal are embroiled in this transfer window, that looks like we're being held to ransom by a player in La Liga?
Yep, I'm just going to share my screen here for Sammy Mockbell's update. Just to round off, by the way, on Florian Wirtz, I think what you say about confidence is literally everything in football, and you've watched his confidence get chipped away through his Liverpool career. So you're right, and I think Lou made a comment further up saying Wirtz does have to start performing under Iraola. Same with Isak, we can't keep giving excuses and looking for reasons why it hasn't worked. And I completely agree. I mean, I really don't want to get on his back, and I won't, but I'm disappointed. I'm disappointed. And I think that's why, somebody like Julian Alvarez, it would be different in a way if Arsenal went and dropped over £100 million on him, because he's proven it in the Premier League. Julian Alvarez could come in and hit the ground running. So I do think, seriously, because Liverpool lack cover at 9, and Julian Alvarez can play anywhere across that front three and in behind and off the striker, and Liverpool now play a 4-4-2. I'd be saying to Atletico Madrid, you can have Florian Wirtz. I think it would make sense for all parties, really. Wirtz could go to Spain, enjoy the life. We've been enjoying the Spanish food earlier today, enjoy more time on the ball. But yeah, that's just me with my Liverpool hat. What do you think of the Julian Alvarez situation, Scarlett? Do you hold out realistic hope that you might sign him?
Well, I think there is a disagreement, Lola, within the Arsenal camp itself about where we should go with this and what we should be expecting with this. And I've actually found myself having this argument with someone who may be watching this stream. Johnny, if you're watching, hello, we're about to talk about the argument you and I had. Because and I do really have sympathy for this. I think a lot of fans feel that after slightly being held to ransom by Vinny Jr., who, there's arguments to be had about how clear it was. But, if you're Vinny Jr., probably what you really want is for Real Madrid to give you a good contract, not to take a risk and go to Arsenal. Now, it's slightly different in Julian Alvarez's case because he's played in the Premier League, and because we know that there are kind of associated issues with that, with, he found it difficult that his family couldn't get visas in the UK. So I don't think it's just him being a brat. But the bottom line is, it's not very Arteta's Arsenal to court and covet and beg a player who doesn't want Arsenal. I think the whole point of Arteta's Arsenal is, you have to fog in want it. These are the standards, etc., etc. But that's what this success is built on. It's built on everybody pulling in the same direction, pulling so hard that they are greater than the sum of their parts. And that's why we've been able to kind of hold at bay teams like Man City and teams with greater resources than us. I'm not saying we're underdogs. I'm just saying, and I think Lola will agree with me, in this league, we are not, and Liverpool are not the expected winners, because we simply don't have the resources that Man City have. And I think that, it's margin ball, it's corners, it's scrapping wherever you can. And that absolutely relates back to who is playing for you and what they want. And absolutely, like we've seen players get frozen out immediately in Aubameyang who don't demonstrate that kind of desire. So there is
I think also you have to be, sorry, just to jump in. I remember last summer you being really despondent about the idea of Liverpool signing Isak, because there's always the temptation to be like, oh, that's the final piece of the puzzle. Oh, and if they add that ingredient, then they're going to be unstoppable. But I think the balance in title-winning teams is very delicate. It's very, very hard to win a Premier League title. And like you say, you need a bunch of players that are absolutely committed and all in. And I think Arsenal, I thought this about the Vinicius Junior signing, and I think about the Alvarez signing. I have zero doubts about the quality of the players, and that they would be very exciting, and that there would briefly be a massive spike in positivity around Arsenal if they sign them. But I think you bring in players with that superstar ego and you risk unsettling things.
But I think that is kind of the flip side of that, and why I want Arsenal to sign Alvarez is because apart from Bukayo Saka, who, I mean, I know that you want to say that he's physically finished. He didn't have his most productive season. He was struggling on and off with injury last year. I think I and many other Arsenal fans pray that he can be in good physical condition this year. And he started by scoring against Coventry. But I don't think anyone else in our front line can claim to be world class. I think Alvarez can. And I think when push comes to shove, this is really my argument for signing someone like Alvarez. When you get into games like the Champions League final, Arsenal, I think Arsenal did absolutely everything they could in that game. And everything they could was to hold PSG at bay. And Havertz scored a really good goal. And I think Arsenal probably could have created one or two more chances, but they just didn't have that ability. They didn't have that X factor. And that's why last season as well, was at times such a slog for them. And another way of looking at it is a fit Odegaard, Saka, Havertz and White on that right-hand side is a kind of axis of excitement and creativity that was missing for a lot of last season. So it's really hard to pull apart the strands. My feeling is that as good as a lot of players at Arsenal are, I just crave that player who is, an undisputed star and who has undisputed quality. And frankly, I would rather it was Vinny, but I absolutely admire Alvarez. And I don't really think his stats tell the full story. Why don't you speak to that? I'm going to try and find Julian Alvarez's stats so we can talk about them. And then I think we should move on.
I just think the idea of undisputed stars that are as yet unsigned are a really dangerous thing, because obviously there are some players that you can sign and it's like an open goal. Like, I don't know, you could sign Lionel Messi and it would be an open goal, or Kylian Mbappe and it would be an open goal. But I'm wary now, because of Liverpool's history now and that last transfer window, of signing players for these big fees that are allegedly guaranteed world class. I think the best, Jeremy Jacquet looks fantastic. That signing was done in January, so I don't really count it as part of Liverpool's summer business. But Liverpool's most exciting signing at the moment is Victor Munoz, who we signed for 40 million euros. And I think I just feel that for years, both Arsenal and Liverpool have done their best work in the transfer market by signing these hungry players that are ready to go up a level. And I'm just deeply, deeply wary of the whole concept of bringing in a superstar. I like the idea of making a superstar. I like the idea of creating a superstar, of nurturing one through from the academy, like a Trent Alexander-Arnold, or bringing in a Mo Salah, somebody with a point to prove. But these £100 million plus deals, if Liverpool do get Bradley Barcola over the line, like it concerns me. It's not something that makes me feel comfortable as a Liverpool fan. So I understand why you say it, but essentially it's the Galactico argument, and fundamentally the Galactico concept didn't work for Real Madrid.
I take your point, Lola, but I think the thing that, and where Arsenal and Liverpool have not taken the step in the past, with the foot on the throat of the division, etc., is to go that step forward, take that step further. And that is the reason why teams like Real Madrid, like Barcelona, are more desirable as a destination than Arsenal. Despite the temptation of London, like there's absolutely no world in which you can argue that they are a club in the same kind of stratosphere emotionally for foreign players. They're just not. And I think the Julian Alvarez transfer would be an outlier to Arteta's policy. And I guess the question is, those players can take you so far. And Mo Salah absolutely happened to be just earth-shatteringly good. Like so good beyond, I think, probably all hope and expectation Liverpool had. But that doesn't happen very often. And Arsenal are in a situation where all of their rivals are on their, or not on their knees, but they're changing. And if Arsenal want to cement themselves as the dominant force in the league and the dominant force in the country, which they are not, in terms of the kind of structure and the way we view clubs in this country, then they have to make big decisions like this. So I agree with you, and I think you've been burned by this. Burned by the saga, by what that does to a player's mind, by what it does to their fitness. I absolutely take all of that on board. But I think if Arsenal have really serious European ambitions, they've got to be thinking about how to improve that left side. And by the way, Christos Solis looks great. I noticed someone talking about him in the comments. We'll come to that.
Raya is saying Munoz and Solis are examples, and I think just above from Raya was a comment saying those 30 to 40 million pound players are gems. And it's harder and harder in this market to find those players. But Arsenal look like they found one in Solis, who looks fantastic. Liverpool look like they might have unearthed something in Victor Munoz. Like, I think that, and I keep bringing it back to Liverpool, but, I am a Liverpool fan and it is my want to talk about Liverpool. I think that's why I'm so frustrated, because Liverpool could have decided in June, or whenever the Diamande deal broke down, which was maybe end of June, early July, could have been like, right, okay, the number one guy, the guy that profiled as the next Mohamed Salah, which by all accounts he was, the absolute outstanding right wing target in Europe, is off the market. So we need to pivot. And in pivoting, I would have loved for Liverpool to have gone for, say, a Solis, Munoz, Minter, bring in this raft of players around that mark and say, right, fight it out, earn the shirt, become that cluster.
Lola, I think that's been Chelsea's strategy for a lot. I think that's the Blueco idea, is to sign valuable talent and at not the greatest expense in the context of the window. Obviously, they cumulatively come together. So Chelsea, alongside Brighton and Bournemouth, are buying those 30 to 40 million pound players. They can just afford to buy millions of them. So it only takes a couple of them to be good, and then and they've protected their sell-on value. I mean, why they can do that and Arsenal really struggle to sell valuable players, I don't know. That's a conversation for another day. But I think all red run it because there's more risk attached to those players, and because Brighton and Bournemouth and the models of their clubs and the ambitions of those two clubs can tolerate the variance of a 30 million pound player not working, or a 30 million pound player taking time to adapt. I've been really pleasantly surprised by Solis, but everybody's calling him I think he looks a little bit like Alexis Sanchez from behind. It's obviously jumping to conclusions, but he's not that good yet. He's good, but he's not great. And I think
just one thing though, you make a really good point, and obviously there is that margin and less pressure and less spotlight at clubs like Brentford, Bournemouth, Brighton. But for example, Bournemouth goes straight into the South American market in January to sign Ryan, which you have to think that the top clubs were aware of Ryan, just because of how fast his star has risen since then, and he was the star in Brazilian football. But isn't it interesting now, to kind of segue onto the broader Premier League, that Manchester City are going straight into that South American market to sign Alan Elias? They're obviously thinking, right, well, we don't fancy paying 100+ million to Brighton to sign this player in a year's time.
Yeah, but they can also afford to do that. Arsenal, and this is the fundamental difference between Arsenal, Liverpool and City, is that Arsenal and Liverpool, and Chelsea as well, Arsenal and Liverpool have so many chips they can spend, which I think is what makes these decisions when you are at the top so much more significant. Peter M, isn't that what the Spurs did after Bale and it failed? Yeah, I mean, to an extent, yeah. I think the transfer window they had, that was the whole balance of power conversation in North London. And I do think, Palmer 3-1 says deselect. That's disappointing. But we'll ignore that that's happening, and we'll talk about Arsenal and Liverpool. To an extent, and obviously they got some valuable players out of that, but they also got some real duff players. And I don't think Arsenal are in a situation where they can afford that right now. Look, Lola, we have about 10 minutes left. I actually think before we move on to Arsenal, because there's not much to say about Arsenal, what I want to know from you is, what do you actually think is going to happen with Alvarez? How likely is it to happen? If it does happen, what would you feel about Arsenal going forward?
Well, I think Julian Alvarez's demeanour on the pitch for Atletico Madrid was terrible. You'd think he was being kept hostage. I actually really, really agree with a lot of the commentary around it, which is Julian Alvarez engineered a way out of Manchester City because he didn't want to be a backup to Haaland. He gets his move. They make him an absolute superstar. And Atletico Madrid obviously are, to an extent, a stepping stone. And that sounds really reductive because they're a massive club, but they are not able to compete at the level of Barcelona and Real Madrid all the time. And he's 2 years into what was, I think, a 6-year deal maybe. And he's desperate to leave, and he says Barcelona is his dream club. And I think he was interviewed at the World Cup and said, someone says, what are your ambitions for the summer? And he said, a transfer. Like, I think he's behaved extremely poorly, Alvarez, but his body language and the boos from the crowd and the character of Simeone makes me think it would be really, really hard for him to recover there. I do feel that his heart is set on Barcelona. So for that reason, I find the idea of an Arsenal deal somewhat unlikely. I think he's an absolutely wonderful footballer, wonderful, wonderful footballer. And I would love to have him at Liverpool. I love to watch him in the Champions League. He's got a rocket of a boot and scores spectacular goals, is so clever with his movement. But I wouldn't be terrified if Arsenal signed him, purely because there would have to be a lot of reworking of the way Arsenal play to accommodate him. And I've seen firsthand with the signing of Florian Wirtz. To be very clear, I don't doubt Florian Wirtz's talent. I think Florian Wirtz is a wonderful talent. And, at times when he's on song, wonderful to watch play as well. I think it's more, he's a square peg, and we haven't yet found the right hole and the right pegs around him to get the best out of him. And I feel that something similar could happen within the delicate balance that is the Arsenal side if you were to bring him in.
Yeah, that's fair enough. And I think it's from an Arsenal perspective, what I don't want to see and what I could see quite realistically is Martinelli going and Arsenal doing nothing with that. I think, there's an argument to say Eze can play on that left-hand side. He did play off the left when he came on against Coventry, arguably with a combination of Dauman, Eze, others off the bench. And Ranieri, although I think he's going to go on loan, there is enough cover in that central area that you could allow Eze to play a lot of minutes out on that left-hand side. But Arteta doesn't really like playing Eze there, particularly after what happened at Villa Park last season when he didn't track Matty Cash and Matty Cash scored and Eze had to go in jail after that. So I think it's an interesting one and it's a live one. My feeling is if Arsenal were to go for someone like Iliman and Jai, and keep their powder drier for something else, I wouldn't be complaining too much. But I do think they need to do something, because to me, the Zoles signing is really positive because it recognises that there was a need for more productivity in that area of the pitch. And that Arsenal, ultimately, if you shut down that right-hand side operation, if you double mark Saka out of the game, then you can stop Arsenal quite easily. And I think in order for Arsenal to take that step, to be more varied, they need to find a way of bringing that left side with them. And I think Eze is such an interesting one because when he signed last season, there was a lot of talk that he was going to play serious minutes there. But he's a player, and I'd be curious to hear what you think of this before we move on and talk about the game. He blows so hot and cold, and I think that's just who he is. Like,
do you know who actually would be a really good signing for Arsenal? No hint of irony from me here, but Cody Gakpo. I think Arsenal should do Martinelli plus cash for Gakpo, Martinelli plus 10 million or whatever for Gakpo. You sold your... Sorry?
If anything, I would be wanting a straight swap for that. I don't want to spend extra cash.
Gakpo's worth about 80 million. But anyway, my point being, Gakpo would solve Arsenal's problem on the left without blowing a massive hole in your budget, giving you variety, output. He's tall. He's really tall, Gakpo. His aerial win percentage is high. Liverpool would get Martinelli, who is Premier League proven. He blows hot and cold, but at least he knows the league, and he's someone who can play now as opposed to Yankuba Minter. And you haven't also had a massive outlay, and you keep your powder dry for when your dream right-wing target, let's say Michael Olise, is available next summer. Rye says, our fan base hates Martinelli for the Bradley situation. I know, but I've seen with who's the player that's come in and said we're friends now. Somebody's come into a club
Bruno
who's been
and Declan. Bruno and Declan.
Yeah, Bruno Guimaraes and Declan Rice have been kicking chunks out of each other for years, and now of course they're on the same team.
Game on, Gonzalo Garcia 2-3.
Gets in. Oh God. Okay, well, there's a bit of a way to come back. Chelsea's defense looks fragile, though.
Yeah,
I should say, by the way, it's important that all of you lovely people in the comments who've joined us tonight, Tadiva is following us at 10 p.m. Tonight. He'll be doing his prediction show. So please do join Tadiva. We're just getting started here on EPL Index. We're only in our second week. I'm loving everyone reveling in Sanchez's mistakes, by the way. I wonder if Chelsea will be driven into the transfer market. That's the one position they seem allergic to actually signing a good player in.
They can have Kepa.
Very good, very good. But yeah, please do all tune into Diva at 10 o'clock. We really, really appreciate your support. But as we say, we're just growing things here. So anything, the generosity of your time or hitting the like button or the subscribe button if you haven't already would be really, really appreciated. And just while we're on the subject of subscribing, I'm not going to tell you what to do. I'm simply going to ask you the question. If you are not subscribed to this channel, why? And tell me in the comments because I'd like to know.
All right.
Gags is in the chat tonight. Gags is in the chat tonight. He says all very blue. To that, Gags, I would say I'm unfortunately feeling in quite a blue mood when it comes to Liverpool, so that's why. And then Scarlet's my identical twin, so it was just telepathic.
All right, let's crack on. We've got about 5 minutes to go, and Lola, we are not going to avoid talking about Arsenal in detail on this stream today. I'm sorry to have to bring this upon you when you're feeling blue. But Arsenal beat the Blues on Friday night, very convincingly, actually. I was there to see it. I don't know if you watched it. I assume you probably didn't. Tell me your thoughts. Tell me how that looked to you and what you made of that.
Well, as everybody knows, I live very, very close to the stadium. So I was sort of surrounded by the pre-match atmosphere, and I went for a run up on Highbury Fields just before the game to kind of soak in the pre-match vibes. And there was a vibe of real excitement and optimism, and rightly so, as the champions that there would be. I did think it was interesting. There was a big cheer for the first goal, obviously, and then I didn't hear anything further, and I kind of assumed the game had just ended 1-0. And this isn't me getting on Arsenal backs, by the way. Like, you can't be madly excited all the time, and you can't be thank you all, Red Runner, hope you have a good shift at work. But yeah, you can't be massively up all the time when you're easily beating a promoted side at home. But I did think it was interesting. I know just from our brother, who is also an Arsenal fan and goes to the game with you, that you were disappointed about the kind of intensity in the stands and Arsenal fans not being in their seats. I suppose to flip it around and speak to you on this is Arsenal fans wanted it massively last season and in seasons gone by, and sometimes to the detriment of their team. What do you think that the fan base being a bit more relaxed is going to help Arsenal this season?
First of all, thank you, Rob G. In answer to your question, Lola, yeah, I think actually that is the kernel of belief that, look, I mean, you know what it feels like to scale that Premier League mountain for a long time, for the first time in a long time. I know you did it in COVID, but that win in Slot's first season and the feeling around that was so huge and intense for Liverpool. And what you put in to win a Premier League title emotionally, as a fan base, as a team, I think Liverpool were the darlings the season they won the league, and we don't need to rehash the reasons why people didn't want Arsenal to win last year, but it was incredibly draining and incredibly stressful for Arsenal fans and players as well. I mean, like, we know that Mikel Arteta was preparing the meats. He was barbecuing when his son said, "Daddy, we're champions," and he couldn't even watch the Bournemouth game. And the tension by the end of the season was so visceral and so physical. And you've been there, I've been there. Huge games at the business end of seasons, they feel different. So I think calmness, yeah, it felt good. For me personally, and I know that I probably feel Thank you, Gags. Yeah, I mean, everybody had a good time at Arsenal's expense last season. And my sort of go-to line about the season was, it felt like hell until it was heaven. It wasn't one of those ones where you really enjoyed the journey along the way to winning. It was just awful until we lifted that trophy, until that moment in the Bournemouth game.
Scarlet, the reason that the football world is against you is because of the way Arsenal play football.
Look, I just said, Lola, we're not here to rehash that. We're not doing that on this stream, and we only have a couple minutes left anyway. The point I'm trying to make is, it was absolutely draining. So I think the calm felt quite nice. I think the calm felt like, because if you are going to go for it again, which Arsenal clearly want to, whether we can is another story. If we are going to go for the title another go, thank you, Gags. I don't love it, but I'm glad you do. Then we're going to need to conserve our energy. Last season was absolutely draining for the players, for the fans, for everyone involved in Arsenal. And if you think about the way Pep teams sort of structured their seasons, they started slow and they came on strong in the business end. And I don't want Arsenal to start slow. But if we can start quiet, that is absolutely fine by me.
I'm just going to pick up this question from AA1, who says, what was the last transfer between Arsenal and Liverpool? And I feel like it's almost a trick question, because I believe that Vincent Joseph, one of our young players, has just signed a contract with Arsenal. So it would be that. And before that, Oxlade-Chamberlain. But yeah, I think the swap deal, Scarlet, Gakpo and Martinelli, it's on. I want to ask you before we go, by the way, because we do have to go in just a moment. And all of you guys, please do log back in at 10 o'clock for Tadiva and his brilliant predictions. So on that subject, Scarlet, I do want to ask you to make one prediction for the last week of the transfer window. It can be applied to any club or Arsenal. But yeah, what's one prediction you want to make?
This is a really good question, Lola. Well, I'm just going to try and manifest it. Julian Alvarez to Arsenal. Sorry, I know it's a boring one.
Would you like to ask me?
What's your prediction?
I think Liverpool are going to sign 3 players between now and the end of the window.
Wow. 3. Yes, I would like Arsenal to politely move Victor Gyökeres on and bring Alvarez in part of the deal. Look, guys, we can't thank you enough. We are going to politely move on. Gags is saying 3. Lola's always been one for outlandish predictions, Gags, but I'm sure you already know that. We're so happy to be with you. Sorry about the slightly slow start and all of our transfer difficulties. Gags said Lola should be manifesting 5. Well, you do need a lot. Liverpool need to sort some things out. Maybe that's personnel, maybe that's more time on the training pitch. I can be very smug because Arsenal won 3-0. Maybe the next time we're here, Arsenal will have lost. Who knows? Next Monday, Arsenal are playing against Chelsea. But guys, thank you again for coming. We're going to be here every week. We're also both doing fan focuses on EPL Index, not this week, but I'll be back next week. Lola, when are you back doing a fan focus?
I will be back next week. We're on holiday at the moment, and we're doing football related things, but we're not going to be on the lives. But there will be plenty for you to look forward to as soon as we're back. Thank you all for the very, very kind comments, and we will see you all next week.
Thank you, everyone.